At Fort Liberty, North Carolina, the Night Shift Radio Communications Center was where military careers went to die. Tucked away in the basement of Building 7, surrounded by humming servers and outdated equipment, it was the military's equivalent of being sent to Siberia. Staff Sergeant Lumina Gajewsky had been assigned there for 18 months, invisible to command, forgotten by daylight operations. Every night at 2100 hours, Lumina would descend those concrete steps, settle into her worn chair, and become just another voice in the dark. Routine communications between bases, weather updates, supply requests, the mundane heartbeat of military logistics that never made headlines. The other operators barely acknowledged her presence. To them, she was just the quiet Polish-American woman who never complained, never caused trouble, and never seemed to exist outside those basement walls. But on Tuesday night at 02:30 a.m., everything changed. Lumina was monitoring the emergency frequency when an unusual transmission crackled through the static. What started as routine chatter from a convoy in eastern Syria suddenly shifted. The radio operator was transmitting in Morse code, but something was wrong. The rhythm was too fast, too precise, too familiar. The rapid-fire pattern of dots and dashes cut through the static like a blade. Her fingers froze over the keyboard. She knew that rhythm. It was a non-standard encryption sequence, one that officially didn't exist in any military manual. Her heart began to race as muscle memory kicked in, her hand automatically transcribing the hidden message buried within the seemingly routine communication. Blackwater 7 compromised. Exfil route Alpha blown. Request Cipher Delta protocol. Luminous blood ran cold. Cipher Delta wasn't just a random code name. It was her code name. A designation from a life she'd tried to leave behind, from operations that officially never happened, from a unit that didn't exist on any organizational chart. She glanced around the empty radio room. No one else was monitoring this frequency. No one else would understand what they'd just heard. But someone out there knew exactly who she was, and they were calling for help. Without hesitation, her fingers moved to the transmitter. Years of training took over as she began tapping out a response in the same encryption pattern, a pattern she'd helped develop 3 years ago at NSA headquarters in Fort Meade. Cipher Delta, online, coordinates required, standing by. 20 minutes later, Admiral James Richardson walked into the communications center for what was supposed to be a routine late-night inspection. Richardson was old-school Navy, a man who'd climbed every rung of the command ladder through sheer determination and battlefield intelligence. He'd been expecting to find the usual night shift skeleton crew running standard operations. What he found instead was Staff Sergeant Gajewsky hunched over her console, fingers flying across multiple keyboards, coordinating what appeared to be a highly sophisticated extraction operation. The radio chatter was unlike anything he'd heard in his 30 years of service, a mixture of standard military communications and encrypted transmissions that seemed to dance between frequencies. Richardson approached quietly, his trained ear picking up fragments of the conversation, grid coordinates for locations that weren't on any standard map, call signs that didn't match any units in the theater, and threading through it all, a precision and authority in Gajewsky's voice that he'd never heard before. Phoenix 7, be advised you have a clean corridor through checkpoint Delta until 0400 hours. Surveillance satellites will be repositioned in 18 minutes. Move now. The Admiral's eyes narrowed. This wasn't standard protocol. This wasn't even standard language. This was the kind of communication he'd only heard in the most classified briefings, the operations that happened in the shadows between official missions. He listened as Lumina coordinated the extraction of what appeared to be a compromised intelligence asset, using real-time satellite feeds, communication intercepts, and field intelligence that shouldn't have been accessible to a Fort Liberty radio operator. Control, this is Phoenix 7. Package secure, returning to base, thanks to whoever's watching over us up there. Lumina's response was barely a whisper, but Admiral Richardson caught every word. Stay safe, Phoenix. Cipher Delta, out. As she powered down the secure channels and began to erase the communication logs with practiced efficiency, Richardson cleared his throat. Lumina spun around, her face draining of color as she saw the Admiral's stars gleaming in the fluorescent light. Sir, I can explain. Staff Sergeant Gajewsky. Richardson's voice was measured, controlled. In my 30 years of military service, I've only heard that level of operational coordination from one place, NSA's Special Activities Division. Cipher Delta was the call sign for their most classified communication protocol specialist. Lumina stood at attention, her mind racing through possibilities. Denial was useless. He'd heard too much. But the truth would mean the end of her carefully constructed cover. The woman who developed that encryption pattern disappeared from Fort Meade 3 years ago, officially transferred to routine duties after a psychological evaluation. Unofficially, she'd seen too much, knew too much, become too much of a security risk to remain in active intelligence operations. The Admiral walked closer, studying her face with the intensity of a man accustomed to reading people's deepest secrets. But what the brass never understood is that you can't just turn off that kind of training, that kind of instinct, that kind of dedication to protecting American lives, no matter where they are or what uniform they're wearing. He gestured toward her communication station. Tonight, you just saved the lives of 3 intelligence operators who were hours away from being captured in Syria. You used skills and clearances that officially don't exist to coordinate an extraction that officially never happened. Lumina stood attention, her mind racing through possibilities. Her shoulders straightened. For the first time in 18 months, she felt like herself again. Sir, I couldn't just let them die. I took an oath. Admiral Richardson nodded slowly. That's exactly what I hoped you'd say, Cipher Delta. Because tomorrow morning, you're being reassigned. The Pentagon has been looking for someone with your particular skill set. Someone who understands that sometimes the most important missions happen in the shadows. He extended his hand. Welcome back to the real war, Staff Sergeant. Your country needs you. As dawn broke over Fort Liberty, Lumina Gajewsky walked up those concrete steps for the last time. Behind her, the basement communication center returned to its routine monitoring of weather reports and supply requests. But somewhere in the mountains of Syria, 3 Americans were alive because a woman everyone had forgotten had remembered who she really was. In the world of military intelligence, heroes don't always wear their medals on their chest. Sometimes they wear their secrets in their hearts, waiting for the moment when duty calls them back into the light.